Assalamu alaikum guys. Today I'm going to cover active voice and passive voice. Okay, so basically we're going to start with me explaining what exactly is the difference between active and passive. So for active voice, it can be said that we have a subject, a verb, and an object. Usually in active voice, usually in English language, this is the normal structure of a sentence. So in active voice, we start with the subject, which is the doer, the verb, which means the work that's happening, the object, which means the receiver of the action. So that means in active voice, we'll straightforwardly see a person carrying out something upon an object. For example, I eat cake. So I is the subject, the doer, the performer. Eat is the verb, which means the action that's going on, and cake is the object upon which the action that's eat is going on. For that means that the cake is being eaten. So on the object, this verb is acting directly. So this is the basic structure of the active voice. In an active voice, basically why it's called active is because in this sentence structure, someone is performing something. It's like the verb is denominating the entire sentence. This means that usually when you want to denote that something is happening or something that happened, and your focus is upon the person that did the action, then you will use active voice. That means whenever the focus of your sentence is upon the actual doer, they are the main focus, that means that you'll use active voice. In contrast, passive voice is a bit different, and passive voice isn't used as much as the active voice. We use active voice 90% of the time. We use passive voice relatively less. When do we use passive voice? First, that we'll learn that we use passive voice when we're in formal situations, when we don't really know the person who carried out the action, and when our focus is on the verb and the object. So these are the three main conditions in which we use passive voice. Passive voice basically does one thing: it turns the normal sentence structure, that is subject verb object, on its head. So it's just completely rearranged. We start with the object which becomes the new subject, then we have the verb, and then the subject. Alright, so the I'll demonstrate these three sentence structures for you. Wait a minute. Okay, so Formal situations that, for example, if I say, um, 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 I completed my work, and then the more formal sentence would be, my work was completed by me. So usually you use a bit of the passive voice in applications or formal letters or thesis, but you don't use it like um, in every sentence. My meaning is that passive sentences and passive voice should be used restrictively. You should use it when you need it and when you think it's appropriate. You should not use passive voice in every sentence just because you're writing a formal letter or a formal application. Passive voice, if you continuously use passive voice, then your sentence becomes way more, I guess, less powerful. When you're writing in active voice, your sentence structure is more powerful, it's more engaging. But when you use passive voice, you sort of take away power from your writing. So try to use passive voice as less as you can. um, Try to incorporate it into sentences that actually need passive voice. All right, so let me just so we covered formal situations, and then when you don't really know who the person that carried out the action is. So if I say in active voice, someone ate my donuts, but I don't know who ate them. मुझे नहीं पता है कौन है. I don't know who ate these donuts. The identity of the person eating my donuts is a mystery. They are unrecognized. We don't know them. All right. So we use passive voice to write sentences when we don't know who carried out the action, or when we don't want to mention them because they are not important enough to mention. Right? So it's like, someone ate my donuts, and it becomes, we write, my donuts were eaten. So in passive voice, when our subject is someone, anyone, everyone, or or some other pronoun that doesn't really tell you who the person is, in passive voice you simply just remove it altogether. We do not use words like someone, anyone, everyone in passive voice. So जब आपको नहीं पता हो कि आपका काम करने वाला कौन है in a sentence, in an active sentence, आपको पता नहीं हो कि आपका काम करने वाला कौन है, so you just, in the passive voice, हम उसको skip कर देते हैं. Alright, so this is what happens when we don't really know the person who carried out the action. Okay, and then the third condition is when our focus is on the verb and the object. So if I want to talk about a building, and when it was built, instead of the person who built it, I will say, this building was built in 19 97. So this building is the object and this is the verb, and our focus is on this building and when it was built, not on who built it. So हमारा जो focus है, it's on the object and the verb, not the subject. तो इसलिए हम लोग फिर इसको passive voice use करते हैं. So whenever our focus is on the object and the verb, we tend to use passive voice instead of the active, or if we don't have information about the subject itself. Alright, so okay, so we'll start with a few rules for active passive. So what happens, like what's the most important part of active passive? The tense shift. The tense shift. The tense shift is the most important and crucial part of active passive. What happens in these sentences is that in order to shift them from active to passive, you need to invoke certain changes in the tenses in order for them to make sense in the passive voice. Alright? Okay, so an important thing to note about this is not all the tenses are important. You can skip some of them. So for your ease, I'm just going to cover, for the sake of this course, I'm just going to cover all of the present tenses, all the past tenses, not all the past tenses, just until the perfect. We're going to skip perfect continuous. We are going to skip perfect continuous. For future tense, we're just going to do future simple. Right, so these are the tenses that we are going to focus on. We are going to do all of the present tenses. We are going to do every past tense except for perfect continuous and then future simple. Now you ask me, why aren't we focusing on the other tenses? And the answer to that is, you can search it online if you don't really take my word for it. These other tenses are not used by native speakers or in English commonly. So for example, future perfect continuous in passive voice is not used by in normal speaking or in writing. So okay, so it's not in use. So there's no point in wasting our time on it, because the sentences themselves do not make sense in passive voice for many of the other tenses except for future simple. Okay, so we're going to start with present. All right, so it's like for active voice, it's basically subject and the first form of verb, that's the object. It's present simple. Okay, so present simple, it's the sentence can be, for example, we talked about this before, I make a cake. In passive voice, it becomes subject plus is, am, are, plus third form of verb plus object. So it becomes the subject becomes the object. There's a shift. All right. And it becomes a cake is made. And then always remember, in order to depict who did the action, in order to denote the subject, in order to denote the doer of the verb, we always use by in active passive. Alright, we always use by in passive. So a cake is made by me. Another thing to remember is that we always use the third form of verb in passive voice. Alright, so I make a cake is made by me. We move on to the next tense. So yeah, we move on to the next tense. It's present continuous. Okay, so we start with the normal, the active tense. It's subject plus am is are plus ing form plus object. Um, in yeah, so this is the normal present continuous tense. The sentence for this will be, they are planting some trees. All right, so in the passive form the formula becomes subject plus is am are plus being plus third form of verb. All right, so this becomes the new tense. So it's this is the object, some trees. This is the object, some trees, and then are from the formula, being from the formula as well. So you have to remember that for present continuous there are two helping verbs that you have to include into your sentence. You have to have is am are, and you have to have being as well. यानी आपको अपनी present continuous के passive में दो almost 3 verbs include करने होंगे. एक तो आपको is am are में से कोई एक डालना होगा. Alright, and then you need to include being as well. उसके साथ आप जो है third form of verb भी फिर use करेंगे. So these are 3 back-to-back verbs being used. So some trees are being, and then the third form of verb planted, and then by, and then them. All right, so another important thing is if for example our subject for example our subject is they, so they technically is also a pronoun like someone, anyone and everyone. It doesn't specify a person. जब हम लोग बोलते हैं वो लोग या वो, तो इसमें भी जो हमारा सब्जेक्ट होता है इट्स अनक्लियर, वी डोंट नो कि वो कौन है. ठीक है, सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल इफ आवर सब्जेक्ट इज दे in the passive form, we simply can just ignore it. Okay, but if it's better if you do put they in your sentence and then change into them, but then you can simply just I guess skip it all together. Okay, so this was present continuous. We'll move on to present perfect. Okay, so yes, we're going to do present perfect. Present perfect, yeah. So present perfect is it's subject plus have or has plus third form of verb, and then the sentence can be someone has eaten my muffin. So again, जब someone आता है, anyone आता है, everyone आता है, या they भी आता है, we can simply just ignore and remove this subject when we change it into passive. You can obviously not for someone, anyone and everyone, but for they you can use they and them in the passive version if you want to, or if the sentence makes more sense with it. But when it's someone, anyone or everyone, we simply just remove it from the sentence. So in passive it becomes subject plus have, has, and then been plus third form of verb plus object. Alright, so this is the structure for present perfect in the passive form, and it changes into my muffin has been eaten. Alright, so it can just simply become my muffin has been eaten. We remove the someone from here. Alright, so in for the next tense, it's present perfect continuous, and the structure for that is subject plus have, has, plus been, plus ing, plus object. The sentence for this can be Lisa has has not been practicing English. Lisa has not been practicing English, and it can just simply shift into the passive, and the formula becomes subject plus have, has, plus been, plus being, plus third form of verb, um, plus object. So you can already see, even in the present tense, that the present perfect continuous formula is quite complicated. It has have or has, then it has been, then it also has being, then it also has a third form of verb. So it has four verbs that you absolutely need to include in every sentence that is written in the passive form. That's why for the present perfect continuous tense, at least the passive sentences make sense. But as you move forward into other tenses like future and past, the sentences themselves begin to make less and less sense. Okay? So it's like the sentence then becomes English has not been being practiced by Lisa. All right. So you can already tell that this passive sentence is sort of complicated and kind of hard to follow. थोड़ा अजीब लग रहा है देखने में, and most of my students do tell me कि most passive sentences just seem weird, अजीब लगते हैं. So you can tell इस sentence को पढ़ के English has not been being practiced by Lisa is kind of weird. पढ़ने में थोड़ा सा अजीब लग रहा है, but at least in the present perfect continuous tense it sort of makes sense. Alright, so we move on to the next tense, and that's past tense. So we start with past simple, and it becomes subject plus second form of verb. That's the normal formula. Okay, so it can be I visited my uncle last week, and in the passive form the formula becomes subject plus was, were, plus object. अच्छा, so remember I told you guys पहले कि हम लोग I don't know if I did tell you this, but was and were सिंपल पास्ट में हम लोग कभी भी किसी एक्शन को शो करने के लिए नहीं बताते एक्टिव वॉइस में. ठीक है, जब आप एक्टिव वॉइस में सेंटेंस लिख रहे होते हैं, जिसमें आपका सब्जेक्ट पहले होता है, काम करने वाला पहले होता है, फिर आपका एक्शन होता है, देन आपका वर्ब होता है. सो यू डोंट यूज़ वॉज एंड वर टू टॉक अबाउट एक्शंस. वॉज एंड वर को एक्टिव वॉइस में सिर्फ डिस्क्रिप्शंस के लिए इस्तेमाल किया जाता है. शी वॉज सैड, शी वॉज हंग्री, दे वर एंग्री, the students were doing their exams. नहीं ये सॉरी ये तो पास्ट कंटिन्यूस हो गई. the students were क्या कह सकते हैं, हाँ the students were celebrating. ठीक है, तो ये आप was and were past simple में इस्तेमाल नहीं करते किसी भी काम को डिनोट करने के लिए. यू ओनली यूज़ was and were टू डिस्क्राइब समथिंग, ठीक है. वॉज एंड वर काम शो करने के लिए सिर्फ पास्ट कंटिन्यूस में यूज़ होता है, ठीक है. जो मैंने अभी बोला गलती से, द स्टूडेंट्स वर सेलिब्रेटिंग, तो इसमें भी नोटिस कीजिए कि स्टूडेंट्स वर सेलिब्रेटिंग, ठीक है. तो हम लोग यहाँ पे कंटिन्यूस फॉर्म यूज़ करें तो ऑटोमेटिकली पास्ट कंटिन्यूस था. हम लोग वॉज एंड वर को सिर्फ पास्ट सिंपल में डिस्क्रिप्शंस के लिए करते हैं. वॉज एंड वर जब हमें यूज़ करना होता है एक्टिव वॉइस में तो वो सिर्फ पास्ट कंटिन्यूस में आता है. बट द रूल सॉर्ट ऑफ चेंजेस जब हम बात करना स्टार्ट कर देते हैं पैसिव वॉइस की. ऑलराइट, सो इन एक्टिव वॉइस यू कैन यूज़ वॉज एंड वर टू टॉक अबाउट एक्शंस. यानी अगर आपके सेंटेंस में कोई काम हो रहा है, कोई काम एक्टिवली हो रहा है, so you don't use was and were. But in passive voice it's part of the formula, so you have to. So this is something you have to remember. If your sentence is in active, make sure that if there is an action going on in your sentence, you don't use was and were. But if you're using the passive voice, you can use was and were in the sentence. Alright, so it's subject plus was and were, third form of verb. It can be my uncle was visited by me last week. Alright, so this just changes into this. Alright, so then we move on to past continuous, and then the formula for past continuous is subject plus was, were plus ing plus object. The sentence can be Sam was delivering the letters to the department. In passive voice the formula becomes subject plus was, were plus being plus third form of verb plus object, and it changes into the letters were being delivered to the apartment. Alright, so this is a simple past continuous sentence. There's nothing there's nothing complicated about that. Okay, so we move on to past perfect. This is the last past tense that we're going to do. The formula for past perfect is subject plus had plus third form of verb plus object. So the sentence can be he had read a book before Nick came. And in the passive voice it becomes subject plus had been plus third form of verb plus object, and then the sentence changes into he had read the book had been read before Nick came. So you can just simply remove the subject from here, or you can just include him. The book had been read by him before Nick came. You can do both of them when you're changing into from active to passive, but always try to include the pronouns she, they, and him within your passive, because internet पे अगर आप देखोगे तो a lot of exercises just don't include the original subject in the passive voice, but for your own understanding and your own ease, try to just include them into the passive voice. Right, so that was past perfect. In order to just show you guys how weird the other voices are that I'm skipping, I'm just going to show you past perfect continuous. Okay, I'm going to directly move on to the passive voice, and the formula is subject plus had plus been plus being plus third form of verb, and it changes into, and the sentence can be like, for example, if the normal sentence was I had been typing for 3 hours, it changes into I had been being typing for 2 hours. Okay, so you can instantly see that this sentence is very weird, and because it's kind of a very unconventional sentence, काफ़ी अजीब है, the native speakers also never use it. It's rarely used, it's almost never used, it's only used within classrooms when people are basically just checking the box and covering all the tenses. इसलिए हम लोग सिर्फ पैसिव वॉइस में इसको इस्तेमाल करते हैं पास्ट परफेक्ट कंटिन्यूस को, वरना नॉर्मली एज यू कैन टेल कि इस तरह के सेंटेंसेस कभी भी यूज़ में आ नहीं सकते. इट्स दे आर वेरी कन्वेंशनल, दे आर वेरी कन्फ्यूजिंग. So but if you need to do it, it can be done. ठीक है. So this was past perfect continuous. We are going to just head on to the future tenses. Okay, the future tense. Okay, so future tense, future simple tense. It will be like, for example, subject plus will, shall, plus first form of verb plus object. That's a simple future tense, and it becomes subject plus will be plus third form of verb plus object. So the sentence that was, my parents will take us to the park. My parents will take us to the park. It changes into we will be taken to the park by parents. Okay, so not our, it's my parents. Okay, so that's how what happens in the future tense. There's another formula. We also in simple future we also use be going to. Like for example, subject plus am is are plus going to. Okay, so instead of present present continuous, we are going to cover the going to formula. Okay, so this is also part of the future continuous tense, but it's a specific verb that we'll stick to when we're dealing with future continuous. So it's going to plus first form of verb and then the object. Okay, so when we're changing it into passive, it becomes subject plus am is are plus going to be plus verb third form plus object. So so the sentence becomes the sentence simply just turns into if for example our sentence is I am going to read a book